It is Morrisound month at Middleton. What does that mean? Not much, just done a bunch of demos in the style of Morrisound recordings. Morrisound, if you don't know, was the place to record in the early 90s in Florida for extreme music, most death metal stuff. So Death, Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, Sepultura, Obituary, even Napalm Death, Cancer. The amount of bands that recorded there, it's most of them from the 90s, and mostly Scott Burns was involved with most of those ones, as well as Tom and Jim Morris, who owned the studio. Although I don't necessarily look back and want to like emulate those tones in my mixes these days. I grew up obsessed with Sepultura, all that death metal stuff. And those records have a special place in my heart, and I love the way those records sound, certain nostalgia about it. So I've done a bunch of demos in the style of Morrisound, deliberately trying to emulate that sound and just ever so slightly modernize it, but trying to retain a lot of those kind of signature elements. So for Arise, shout out to Ol from Evile for playing guitars on this one. I asked him just because I couldn't be bothered to figure out all the riffs and the intricacies of everything in the solo. He knew it already, I know that. And the thing with a lot of the Morrisound guitar tones, they're so scooped and kind of like piercing at the same time. I can't always tell what the notes are. And that's not, I don't mean to throw shade at those tones. They're sick, but sometimes I just don't know what the notes are. So just figured I'd leave the guitars to Ol for this one. In terms of the guitar rig, I can't say I know too much about the Arise guitar tone. I think they were using like Mark III, Mark IV. For the guitar tone, I can't say I know too much about it. I think they might have been using some of the Mark III or IV Mesa Boogie amps, as well as probably a JCM 800. Probably EMGs. Ol didn't have EMGs in his guitar, but I've clipped his DIs. And yeah, we'll just get into it now and you can see what I've done. Did I mention Deicide? That first Deicide record, hence wearing the t-shirt. So sick, love that one. Scott Burns as well. So let's dig into drums first for this one. So I think it's essentially like the old school death metal kit. And the main thing that sticks out is that snare drum. It's a pretty classic kind of 80s, 90s, big fat snare drum. Got quite a lot of reverb on it. Yeah, just sounds very similar to that Arise drum sound. Kick using, that's the default kick, Yamaha 22 with the Remo head. Toms, the Yamaha one. So it's pretty much the default kit with the Ludwig 402 snare in the lower tuning. So let's go through. Yep, no one shot loaded in. No overheads, a little bit of the room mic on the kick. Got a fair bit more of the overhead coming through. Now the overhead signal is a lot quieter than the close mics, so just because it's louder on the fader, it's not actually like louder in the mix. So yeah, it's pitch on the snare. No, everything's intact pitch wise. Transient, added a tiny bit more transient to the snare, 3.6. That's not a lot. Toms, pretty much standard. I think I boosted up. No, the overheads are at -6.7. Room mics. Yep. So it's pretty standard. Pretty wet sounding. So on the reverb, I'm at almost 50% on some of these. Usually you can have a bit more reverb on like the higher toms than the lower ones. Too much reverb on the lower ones can get a bit muddy, but that's all good. 48% on the snare, so quite a sort of retro amount of reverb. Made the hi-hats a little darker, turn them up. Yeah, so nothing too crazy on that. That's just how they sound. Let's have a listen just to the drums on their own, and I programmed these myself. So if you haven't seen the video of me talking about this before, this library is designed for many reasons, very deliberately, to mostly just be left at 127 velocity. But as you can see, I go in on like faster fills, especially like really fast floor tom rolls, and just add in some dynamics here to the velocity levels. Because, you know, at this sort of tempo, 234 BPM, a drummer is not going to be hitting that hard on a roll that fast around the toms. So for a beat like that, you can program it as if you're an absolute animal, just like both hands hammering the snare and the hi-hats. When it comes to a verse like the thrash riff, you'll see my hi-hats are not at 127 and I'm accenting them. The harder hits go with the snare. A lot of people get thrash beats wrong when they're programming, especially guitarists. They just put the hi-hat on the kick and then the snare on the offbeat, and it's just like pst, 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 pst. It just sounds like a hoedown. If you're doing really, really fast drums, thrash beats, and you're a drummer and it's really hard to do doubles on your right hand, it's way better to switch to just putting the hi-hats just on the snare. And that'll sound a lot better than doing hi-hats on the kicks. Nothing worse. Absolute pet peeve of mine when drummers can't play a proper thrash beat. Anyway, I've accented it, so you don't want to accent heavily on the kicks. You want to accent more heavily on the snares. Same for the ride cymbal as well. Got some thrash on the ride here. And sometimes I move the cymbals ever so slightly ahead of the beat. That kind of thing. I don't know when the groove pack's out, but working on a Middleton groove pack if you are new to programming drums. Well, there's another cool section, this bit on the toms. So yeah, going in for a lot of humanization on that. So usually with drummers on these types of sections, on most fills, we're accenting, so quieter, and anything that's sort of like on a beat in the bar, a little bit louder to get a bit more of a groove to it. Cool. Yeah, so that's it for drums. Pretty much the default kit with the old school death metal snare drum. Bit more reverb. So the guitar tone. Now, all doesn't have EMG pickups, and I'm pretty sure Sepultura were using EMGs at the time. So what I've done, and let me turn the EQ off for the processing on that. Let's see, make sure it's not too loud. What I've done is clip the DI track here with JST clip. So it's kind of subtle, but it's just taking the edge off. Just trying to mimic, you know, an EMG thing, and focusing on the mid-range, so I'm EQing the DI as well. Another reason for doing this and getting rid of all this high-end, it might seem unusual, but some pedals kind of do this anyway. Because I'm using a Marshall on a plugin, so SDR amp hub, they can be pretty shrill sounding on the high end and have that kind of single coil kind of sound to it. So that's kind of why I'm focusing on the mids. Got this Tyrant pedal. I have a feeling that a lot of the records that were done at Moral Sound with an 800 were probably using more of a distortion pedal rather than just like a drive pedal. And a lot of those records probably ended up having some solid state gear as well. So either pedals or solid state kind of amps with a ton of gain. So this pedal is not my typical go-to, but I was just having an experiment really in amp hub. Thought I'd try something different. That's the 800 settings. It's a pretty kind of, I'd say dull. It's not a dull tone, but there's not a lot of like presence in the tone. Obviously not a lot of mids. And then for the cab, I'm using a blend of a 421 for my impulse response pack and a 57 on my Marshall cab. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same on the other side. And then we can look at the guitar bus. There's a lot going on here. Admittedly, because I'm trying to emulate a very specific tone. So C4 multiband compressor. Admittedly, I probably didn't need to do too much of that because they definitely wouldn't have been using one of these, and they probably didn't have any sort of like multiband compressor, like analog outboard gear at the time. that they were using. So a lot of that lower mid woomph is left in on those Morrison recordings. So that's the tone, and it is really scooped, really shrill sounding. So I haven't looked at this EQ. So this is my classic subtractive EQ. That is the big old Morrison scoop. It's usually between like 800, 850 to 1K, usually around like 950. So I'm just kind of taking out a lot of stuff that is harsh in the guitar tone. You'll have seen me do this in all of the videos I've ever done on guitar EQing. This is dynamic EQ, kind of working on the palm mute problematic woomphy area. This is the big scoop that I wouldn't normally do, but I'm trying to emulate that tone. And then all these frequencies, just sort of like whistling in the cab tone. And this one, again, I was just trying to emulate that kind of sound. So up next, the analog SSL style piece of gear. So we're boosting 12K by 6.5 dB. So it's pretty harsh and old school sounding here. Then we're boosting 3.4 by 10.6 dB. And then off the back of that, yes, we'll be doing a lot more EQing, I guess. Let's have a look. So scooping that area out even more. Again, this is me really trying to emulate and go off the original guitar tone. And there's like, this is where the peak of the high end is, which is a similar area for me that I would normally want my high end to cut through. It's just really, really cuts through on the original recording. And I've got the original guitars that I would A/B against in this mix. So if I loop this bit here, this is the actual record tone. I mean, look at that. It's really peaking at like 2.5K, which I would not normally let through. Huge scoop around here. So yeah, I'm trying to, get this mix to sound close to the original. So that's why I've made some of those moves that I did. So yeah, up next, bass. I think I'm just using nocturnal bass. I'm guessing he might have used a P bass in the studio, because that's what I think he was using a bit around that time. I think he was using a P bass. I haven't checked, but I'm pretty sure he's using one like a sort of blonde Fender in the Barcelona Under Siege live. I was going to say DVD then. I've actually got the original VHS of that. So yeah, nocturnal bass. Yep. I've got the P bass plugin, but I'm just like using this at the moment. In case you didn't see, the reason I like using bass plugins, quickly repeat myself, because I have millions and millions of different demos writing and on the go at any one time. Sometimes when I'm revisiting a really old song, really old demo, and I can't remember how to play the riff, I can just read the MIDI as if it's tab to help me figure out riffs that I can't remember. Also, if I've got a guitar on my lap, I don't even own a bass, so there's that. But if I did own a bass, I'd have to keep like putting the guitar down, track some bass, record that riff, put it back, and get, sometimes basses aren't the same level that you'd want a guitar to be at, and then changing like, yeah, it's an absolute faff when you're writing. So that is why I use bass VST plugins for writing. Don't use them in the studio for the records, I mean, but super useful when you're writing. So up first, the DI. Multiband compression, just to try and flatten the bass out. Try and keep the low end locked in. Compression. Dark glass for the tone, the snarl. The blend here. Getting a bit of the kind of DI signal through. EQ. limiting. And EQ again. And might bring some of that sub down just a bit. Hard to know exactly what's going on with the bass on the record because it's not super like prominent in a way that really cuts through the mix. So I didn't want the bass to be too overpowering for this one. And then master bus processing. I've got my output down here just for the sake of recording this video. There's a lot of plugins on my master bus, but I don't like actually going super heavy handed. But so I don't think what I'm doing is really drastically changing the mix. There's just a few little things along the way. So first one, EQ, just taking out a bit of sub low end. Don't need a lot of that, just a tiny high end boost. Normally I try and avoid doing any EQ on my master bus. It's just a lot easier just to leave all EQ moves for your mixing. I don't personally like top down mixing with an EQ just on at all times. It gets confusing. I also use my eyes loads when I'm mixing with FabFilter. So yeah, I don't recommend it, especially if you're new to mixing. Solid bus comp. Kind of just tickling the mix. Same with this VC Red. This is working fast attack, fast release, high pass filter to around 80 and just sort of tickling the snare. Tape saturation, I don't like to abuse this or use it too much, but this was done to tape, the original recording, so I'm trying to get a bit of that vibe to it. And now it's about to get loud. I'm going to turn it down even more. Flatline 2, clipping. And retaining those transients, and then up last, Pro L limiter. So you can kind of tell by looking at this that the drums are super loud and the balance of the mix isn't exactly how I would normally mix. And you can see that visually on the limiter here. I mean, it's all drums. The guitars really aren't taking up as much room in this one. So yeah, but either way, I don't like to absolutely abuse the limiting in my mixes either. And I don't really care anymore about having like the loudest mixes ever. So yeah, there's a bunch of plugins on my master bus, but it's nothing too drastic. So yeah, that is it. Oh, and vocals. So I'm going to turn all of that off and then we're going to go check out the vocals because I don't normally have vocals in these videos. So I just tracked into this SM7B. I don't have any fancy preamp. I really don't care about that sort of thing, especially for heavy vocals. Just go straight into my Focusrite interface. That's what I've used for the past few records. Just a good signal in, and then pretty much just gain reduction is the main thing. So let's see, taking out some low end from my vocals, putting in a bunch of high end. We can listen. No vocalist likes people hearing their voice completely unmixed, but I don't care. So this is some reverse reverb. I'm scared by the sun. I'm pulling empty clutch. So yeah, let's look at the EQ. Cease falling rain. Why must we die? And de-essing it. This is on a stereo track, which is why it's stereo. I'm scared by the sun. So de-esser just tackles, if you don't know, it just tackles like S sounds and like harsh sibilances in your vocals. So it only kicks in on like harsh S's and that kind of thing. I'm scared by the sun. I'm pulling empty clutch. Cool, and then up next, going to get loud, gain reduction. Cease falling rain, why must we die? Just absolutely hammering it, you know, compress the shit out of my vocals, add a bit of distortion just to kind of even them out. Up next, this is a really easy plugin to use. I don't normally use settings quite like this on my vocals, but I'm going for a late 80s, early 90s kind of retro vibe. So large reverb, quarter note, delay, and the stereo widener, which kind of adds a chorusiness to it. I'm scared by the sun. I'm pulling empty clutch. Cease falling rain. Why must we die? And I think I'm just EQing a bit again, taking off more low end from my voice. and like some dynamic EQ in that kind of boxy area. And then, yeah, got these sort of like reverse delay, pre-delay vocals here. Where you just chop up the original vocal track, just sort of lazily. You could automate it, I couldn't be bothered, I just pulled the audio down. Yeah, so that is it for that one. Hope you found that interesting, maybe. Check out Ultimate Heavy Drums. If you sign up to the newsletter as well, or you buy this, I'm going to offer a new selection of one-shot samples as well, which you can load into the one-shot sample loaders.